Most weekends this spring, Americans have gone outside, looked at the sky, and asked the same question: is it over yet? The tornadoes, the hail, the flash floods, the freeze warnings, the fire weather, the back-to-back rounds of severe weather that have made April 2026 one of the most relentlessly violent spring seasons in memory. And most weekends, the answer has been no. This weekend is no different. In fact, what is coming over the next 72 hours is not one threat. It is 5 separate weather hazards activating simultaneously across different parts of the same country, stretching from the high plains to the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. And together they represent one of the most complex and multi-layered weather setups the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center have had to communicate to the public in a single forecast period all year. Let's go through each one, because this weekend deserves to be understood in full. The core of the severe weather threat this weekend sits along the southern plains, where the Storm Prediction Center has been watching a setup develop for days. The setup is classic in its ingredients and dangerous in its specifics. A lifting warm front is pushing northward across the region, and along and south of that boundary, the atmosphere is becoming explosive. Forecast mu-Kp values, which measure the maximum available energy for updraft development anywhere in the vertical column of the atmosphere, are running between 2,000 and 3,000 joules per kilogram across portions of southwest Kansas into east central Oklahoma. That is a significant number. For context, anything above 1,000 joules per kilogram is considered supportive of severe thunderstorms. Values between 2,000 and 3,000 place you in the range where supercell thunderstorms can sustain themselves for extended periods and produce genuinely violent hazards. The low-level jet is continuously advecting mid-60s dew points northward across the boundary, loading the atmosphere with tropical-grade moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Effective layer wind shear around 40 knots is more than sufficient to support rotating supercell development during the afternoon and early evening hours. The Storm Prediction Center's forecast guidance for Saturday shows thunderstorms developing during the late afternoon and early evening along the warm front across the southern plains. The expectation is that these initial supercells will eventually grow upscale into bowing segments as instability peaks and as the overnight low-level jet strengthens further. Bowing segments, also called bow echoes, are bow-shaped lines of intense thunderstorms that are specifically associated with destructive straight-line winds. When a supercell mode storm transitions into a bow echo overnight, it can move at 50 to 70 miles per hour and deliver wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour over a wide swath of ground with very little warning time. A 30% probability area for severe weather has been introduced across southwest Kansas into east central Oklahoma, with the expectation of strong bowing segments pushing east-southeast overnight into a powerful low-level jet. For communities across this corridor, the overnight hours carry every bit as much risk as the afternoon, and in some respects more, because wind events from fast-moving bow echoes in the dark are among the most difficult weather hazards to communicate and prepare for in real time. The rainfall and flooding dimension of this weekend's setup is just as serious as the severe wind and tornado threat, and it is unfolding across a separate corridor. The Weather Prediction Center has identified the greatest flash flooding concern stretching from central Arkansas to central Mississippi, where deep moisture surging northward will intercept an incoming frontal boundary from the plains. Rainfall totals on the order of 1 to 3 inches are possible across this zone, but that range understates the localized risk. The North American Mesoscale model indicated that rainfall rates in some scenarios could pulse upward to 4 inches per hour as convective cells approach the Arkansas and Mississippi border area. 4 inches per hour is a rate that overwhelms virtually any urban or suburban drainage system within minutes. It is the kind of rate that turns normally passable underpasses into death traps for drivers, that send small creeks out of their banks before any official flood warning can be issued. And that creates life-threatening flood conditions in the exact areas where most people are doing exactly what they always do on a Friday evening: driving home from work, dropping children off at activities, and going about their lives without any awareness that the atmosphere is about to deliver something extreme directly overhead. The Weather Prediction Center's excessive rainfall discussion has flagged a marginal risk for portions of the Mid-South through Friday and Saturday, with the potential for a convective cluster or back-building convective line to develop by Friday morning across northern Arkansas. The term back-building is one that experienced storm spotters and emergency managers read carefully. It describes a situation where new storm cells continuously develop on the upwind side of an existing storm and then move over the same ground that has already been hit. The result is that instead of a heavy rain event passing through in 30 minutes, the same area receives multiple rounds of intense rainfall over several hours, with cumulative totals that can easily exceed what the individual rainfall rate alone would suggest. Parts of Wisconsin and the surrounding area which have already been hit multiple times by flooding events in April 2026, and where the Wolf River crested nearly a foot above its record flood stage earlier this month, are flagged as particularly sensitive to flash flooding even in a marginal risk scenario, because the memory of previous floods has left underlying soil saturation that the surface drying has not fully reversed. The Great Lakes region deserves its own paragraph this weekend because what has been happening there over the past week has been extraordinary, even by the standard of everything else April 2026 has produced. Historic flooding across the Great Lakes has pushed ice chunks into homes in Michigan, a visual that has circulated widely and captures something of the raw power of what prolonged flood conditions can do to a landscape. River levels across parts of Michigan and Wisconsin have been running at major or record flood stage, with communities in some areas still conducting ongoing rescues or managing ongoing road closures from events that began more than a week ago. The incoming frontal system this weekend is forecast to bring additional rainfall across portions of the Great Lakes corridor, and for areas still carrying elevated river levels and saturated soils from the previous round, even a moderate rainfall event carries an outsized flooding risk. The WPC has been explicit that storm speed and rainfall rate will determine whether the overall risk remains manageable or escalates sharply. Slower moving systems with persistent heavy rain over pre-wet ground are the scenarios that produce the most damaging outcomes. Now for the one that does not involve water at all. The high plains. This weekend are facing the exact opposite problem. While the southern plains and the south are dealing with excessive moisture, a critical fire weather risk is in effect across much of the central and southern high plains through Friday. Gusty winds, warm temperatures, and very dry conditions are creating the kind of fire weather environment in which a single ignition can produce a rapidly spreading wildfire before aerial or ground resources can get into position. The same atmospheric pattern that is driving moisture northward from the Gulf is also driving dry, gusty winds out of the southwest across western Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and portions of the Texas Panhandle, the precise geography where the fire season of 2024 produced some of the largest and fastest spreading range fires in recorded American history. The Smokehouse Creek Fire of 2024, which burned over 1 million acres across the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle in less than a week, occurred in nearly identical surface wind and dryness conditions to what the high plains will experience this weekend. The relative humidity across these areas is forecast to drop into the single digits during peak afternoon heating hours on Friday, and wind gusts in exposed areas of the high plains are expected to reach 40 to 50 miles per hour. In those conditions, a fire can travel faster than a person can run, and faster than emergency responders can be notified and deployed. The combination of all of these hazards occurring simultaneously across adjacent regions is not coincidental. They are all products of the same large-scale atmospheric pattern. A strong frontal system is pushing out of the west and southwest, dragging dry air over the high plains, while simultaneously providing the lifting mechanism that is destabilizing the moisture-laden air across the plains in the south. The temperature and moisture contrast across this frontal boundary, with extremely dry air on one side and Gulf moisture on the other, is exactly what generates both the fire weather risk on the dry side and the severe storm and flooding risk on the wet side. The jet stream is positioned in a way that supports persistent southerly flow at low levels, keeping the moisture supply from the Gulf continuous and ensuring that multiple rounds of convection are possible over the same areas throughout Saturday and into Sunday. Illinois deserves a specific mention this weekend because of what the data shows. AccuWeather has reported that Illinois leads the entire nation in tornado, hail, and wind reports so far in 2026. That is a remarkable statistic for a state that does not sit at the geographic center of Tornado Alley. Illinois has traditionally been considered part of the tornado risk corridor, but not the heart of it. In 2026, repeated storm tracks have made the state the single most active location for severe weather reports in the country across all three categories simultaneously. The April 17th EF3 tornado that struck southern Kankakee County and crossed into Indiana was the most violent of several tornadoes that have hit Illinois this year, but it was not the only one. And the atmospheric pattern this weekend continues to place Illinois in the active zone for severe convection. Communities that have already endured multiple severe weather events within the same month are now facing the prospect of another active weekend with whatever psychological and practical preparation that demands. Understanding why a spring pattern like this one can produce consecutive weeks of severe weather without significant interruption requires understanding the concept of an active trough regime. The upper-level atmospheric pattern across North America has been dominated for most of April 2026 by a persistent long-wave. Long-wave features in the atmosphere are slow to change, unlike the shorter wave disturbances that individual storms ride on. When a long wave trough establishes itself in the west, it creates a recurring meteorological factory. Each time a shortwave disturbance rides around the base of the trough and moves eastward, it encounters the sharp baroclinic zone between dry western air and moist Gulf air in the central and southern plains, and the result is another round of severe weather, another day of tornado watches, another series of flash flood warnings from Arkansas to Wisconsin. The trough does not have to do anything new. It simply has to persist, and the disturbances embedded within it will keep doing the work. The Climate Prediction Center's probability hazards outlook for the period from Saturday, April 25th through Wednesday, April 29th, specifically identifies a shortwave trough moving toward the Great Lakes at the start of the following week, with an accompanying surface, low pressure, and trailing cold front. The frontal boundary is expected to move southward through the southern Great Plains, the Mississippi and Tennessee valleys, and into the central and southern Appalachians. The return flow west of a surface high over the western North Atlantic is anticipated to increase moisture available to that system, enhancing precipitation totals further. In plain terms, after this weekend's event clears, the atmosphere is already setting up the next one. The factory is not shutting down. For anyone planning to be outside this weekend across the affected regions, the practical message is simple and consistent. Know your risk zone before Saturday arrives, not after. The Southern Plains corridor from southwest Kansas through east central Oklahoma faces the most direct severe storm risk on Saturday afternoon and evening. The south central corridor from northern Arkansas through central Mississippi faces the highest flash flooding risk. The High Plains faces critical fire weather from Friday onward. The Great Lakes faces renewed flooding stress from incoming rainfall on already saturated ground. These are not equal risks spread uniformly, but they are all real, all occurring simultaneously, and all demanding different preparations from the communities they affect. Download the weather app with push alert capability for your location before you go to bed on Friday. Make sure your severe weather shelter plan is current and that every person in your household knows where to go when a warning is issued. If you live near any of the rivers and streams across Arkansas, Mississippi, Wisconsin, or Michigan that have already been elevated by previous flooding events this month, treat any incoming rainfall this weekend as a reason to monitor water levels actively and to be ready to move to higher ground before official orders reach you. If you are in western Kansas, Oklahoma, or the Texas Panhandle and conditions deteriorate toward critical fire weather on Saturday, be aware of open burning restrictions and any active fire reports in your area, because the speed at which fires have spread this year in these conditions has repeatedly outpaced early warning systems. April 2026 has asked a great deal of the communities in the American heartland already. This weekend, it is asking once more. The atmosphere does not consult a calendar, it does not account for storm fatigue, and it does not offer the stretched emergency management resources of Illinois, Arkansas, Kansas, and Michigan any additional lead time because they have already been through so much this month. What it does offer, via the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center, is the best available science and the most accurate forecast guidance that any generation of Americans has ever had access to in advance of an event like this. Using that guidance, acting on it early, and treating the coming weekend with the seriousness that the data demands is the difference between this being another difficult weekend the heartland weathers and something worse. You have been warned. Now act like it. One final thing worth saying for people who have followed the weather news this month and are starting to feel a creeping numbness toward the warnings. That numbness is understandable. When warning after warning arrives week after week, the human brain begins to treat the next one as routine. It starts discounting the urgency. It starts saying yes, but last Saturday nothing happened near me, so maybe this Saturday will be the same. That cognitive adjustment is one of the most dangerous things that a prolonged period of severe weather can produce in a population, because it reduces the protective behavior that warnings are designed to trigger at precisely the moment when another genuinely dangerous event is arriving. The meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center, the Weather Prediction Center, and the regional National Weather Service offices have not changed their language this weekend because the pattern has not changed. The active trough is still there. The Gulf moisture is still surging. The fire weather conditions on the high plains are still critical. If anything, the week's data has strengthened rather than weakened confidence in the severity of what Saturday and Sunday hold. The warnings are not routine this weekend.